4,000 ships and I was the one sweating. That is the part nobody tells you about commanding the coalition's largest punitive armada in 800 years. The weight does not sit on your shoulders, like the old human stories describe it. It sits behind your eyes, pressing outward, like something inside your skull wants out. I had commanded fleets before. I had directed surgical strikes, border corrections, species-level deterrence operations. I had never once felt what I felt in the first 11 seconds after we dropped out of faster-than-light travel above the edge of the quarantined Helix 7 system. My name is Vexthara Osun. I am a fleet tactician of the Coalition of Allied Species, 3rd grade, 31 years of service, 0 battlefield losses. That last number mattered more to me than I ever admitted. It was the only number I checked every morning before anything else. The number I was looking at now was 1. 1 ship. My sensor officer, a young Dranathi named Yoon, read the data aloud in the flat professional tone we train our people to use no matter what their instruments are telling them. His voice was steady. His hands were not. Single vessel, Commander. Stationary. No evasive movement. No weapon charge signatures. Transmitting a repeating identification ping on the standard diplomatic band. I stared at the display. 4,000 coalition warships sat in layered formation behind me. The finest military architecture 11,000 years of interspecies cooperation had ever produced. Our smallest picket vessel outweighed that human ship by a factor of 6. Our flagship, the Collective Resolve, outweighed it by a factor closer to 400. The human ship sat there like it had been waiting for us. It had no elegance to it. That was the first thing that struck me, and I am embarrassed now by how much time I spent thinking about it. Coalition warships are designed with what our engineers call harmonic purpose. Every curve serves an aerodynamic or energy dispersal function, but the overall form still achieves something close to beauty. The Dranathi fleet lines are long and tapered. The Vul vessels carry those wide forward arrays that look like open hands. Even the brutish Crethon ships have a kind of squat, deliberate symmetry to them. The human ship was ugly in a way that felt personal. It was asymmetrical. One side carried a heavier weapon array than the other, which meant it had been modified after its original construction, possibly more than once. The hull showed repair patches in 3 different grades of metal, none of them matching the original plating. There were external conduits running along the spine that our analysts could not classify at all. They were not part of any human technology file in our records. The ship had a name stenciled along the port hull in the angular characters of the human English language. Our translation systems rendered it as something between a command and a warning. The Relentless. I allowed myself exactly 4 seconds of quiet looking. Then I turned to my communications officer. Send the standard pre-engagement contact package. Diplomatic band, coalition formal register, full ritual protocol. The pre-engagement contact package is not a threat. It is not an ultimatum. It is, at its core, an invitation to begin the process that civilized species have used for 11,000 years to turn violent disagreement into structured, proportional conflict. It includes a statement of our grievances, which in this case were the documented incursions by human exploration vessels into 3 protected systems over the past 2 years. It includes an invitation to negotiate a settlement. It includes, if negotiation fails, the formal terms under which engagement would proceed, including agreed casualty caps, protected zones, and the expected duration of hostilities. We sent all of it, twice, on 4 separate frequencies. The Relentless transmitted nothing back. It just sat there, 400 kilometers ahead of my forward picket line, that repeating identification ping going out like a heartbeat. Steady, patient, almost contemptuous in its patience. Ewan turned from his station. He was young enough that he had not yet learned to keep the uncertainty off his face. Commander, no response to diplomatic contact. Vessel shows no sign of receiver malfunction. They are receiving our transmissions. I know. Should we attempt non-standard contact frequencies? Perhaps their communications array operates on different. They are receiving us, Ewan. They are choosing not to respond. He went quiet. Around the bridge, I could feel the shift in the room. That particular collective stillness that happens when experienced officers encounter something their training did not prepare them for. Coalition protocol is built on the assumption that all spacefaring species, at some level, want to negotiate. The entire machinery of interstellar conflict management rests on that assumption. You send the package. The other party responds. You enter the pre-engagement dialogue. You eventually reach either a settlement or a formalized conflict, with rules both sides understand and accept. The system had held for 11,000 years. 11,000 years of wars that were more like arguments with agreed-upon budgets. Nobody had ever just not responded. I studied the human vessel. It was still not moving, still not charging weapons, still not doing anything at all except sitting there and being ugly and making my senior staff look at each other with their professional faces slowly slipping. "What do we know about that ship's classification?" I asked. My intelligence officer, a Vul named Sarek, pulled up the file. It was thin, embarrassingly thin, considering we had been studying humanity for over a century since first contact. Coalition intelligence classifies that hull configuration as a patrol-class enforcement vessel. Primary role is border security and customs enforcement. Standard armament for the class includes pulse cannons, point defense clusters, and a single torpedo bank. Nothing in the file suggests offensive capability beyond engagement with smaller civilian vessels or light military targets. "So it is a police ship," I said. "Essentially, yes. They sent a police ship. That appears to be the case." I sat back in my command chair and pressed 2 fingers against the space between my eyes. 11,000 years of coalition tactical doctrine stretched out behind me, like a road I had always trusted, and at the end of that road was a human police ship that would not answer its radio. Then its engines flared. Not toward us, not away. The Relentless rotated on its axis with a kind of slow, deliberate precision that reminded me, absurdly, of someone turning in their chair to get a better look at something. It completed the rotation and held there, its port weapons array now facing our formation, at an angle that was not quite a targeting solution, but was close enough to one that my tactical officer called a yellow alert, without waiting for my order. "Hold," I said. The Relentless held its new position. The identification ping continued, steady, calm. "Commander," Ewan said, and something in his voice made me look at him directly. "What is it doing?" It was a good question. It was, in fact, the question that kept me awake for a long time afterward. I did not have an answer then. What I said in the moment was the only honest thing I could say. "I think it is deciding." The bridge went quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation system. The Relentless sat there in the dark between stars, one ship against 4,000, and it took its time deciding. It did not rush. It did not panic. It held its new angle, and it breathed. And I do not mean that literally, except that it felt literal. The vessel had presence in a way that ships are not supposed to have. Ships are machines. They project power, or they project vulnerability, or they project insignificance. This ship projected something I did not have a word for in my language. I found a word for it later. It took me several months of sitting alone thinking about that moment before I found it. The word was intent. The Relentless sat in the dark, and it intended things. My tactical officer's voice cut through the quiet. His name was Oren, and he was the oldest member of my senior staff, a Crethan who had served under 3 commanders before me, and who I had never once heard express anything approaching alarm. He sounded alarmed. "Commander, the vessel's weapon systems are powering up." I straightened in my chair. "Full charge? Partial charge. 1 forward array. It is not targeting our formation. It is pointing approximately 30 degrees off our bow. Not a targeting solution. Not a warning shot position. Something else. Something in between. All stations, heightened alert. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage unless I give the direct order." The acknowledgements came back from 4,000 ships, 4,000 crews, watching one ugly police vessel, with one partially charged weapon array, pointed at nothing in particular. I leaned forward. The Relentless finished its power-up sequence. Every sensor on every ship in my fleet was locked on it, reading its energy signature, calculating probable weapon yield, running engagement projections. 4,000 tactical computers were drawing the same conclusions and feeding the same recommendations upward through the chain of command, all of them arriving at my display as a single suggestion rendered in the calm language of military software. The suggestion was to fire. The math was clean. 1 vessel against 4,000, with no shields raised and its weapons pointed away from us, was not a tactical problem. It was barely a calculation. My fleet could have reduced the Relentless to expanding gas in under 2 seconds, with minimal coordination required. The projections said this with the flat certainty that computer systems use when the answer is beyond obvious. I looked at the Relentless. It had rotated again, slightly, just a few degrees. The partial weapon charge was still holding. It was not pointing at us, but it was no longer pointing away from us. It was pointing at a place we were not yet, but might be if we moved. It was watching us decide. The identification ping continued, steady, patient, unchanging. "Commander," Oran said quietly, "protocol suggests." "I know what protocol suggests." I stared at the display, at one ship, at one ugly patched asymmetrical ship that had not answered a single communication, that had not made a threatening move, that had simply arrived and waited, and then turned to look at us. 4,000 ships, the finest armada the Coalition had assembled in 8 centuries, and I was sitting in my command chair with my fingers pressed against my eyes, trying to understand why a police vessel was making me feel like I was the one who had made a mistake by showing up. I should have opened fire. Every doctrine I had ever learned said to open fire. One unresponsive vessel in a contested system, partial weapon charge, non-compliant with contact protocol. Open fire. It was not even a decision. It was a procedure. I did not open fire. I told myself it was because I needed more information. I told myself the political consequences of destroying a human vessel, without documented provocation, were unacceptably complex. I told myself that 4,000 ships could afford to wait. I told myself a lot of things that night. What I did not tell myself, because I was not ready to hear it, was the truth. The truth was simpler and more uncomfortable than any tactical calculation. The Relentless did not look like a vessel that was afraid of 4,000 ships, and I could not figure out why. I ordered the fleet to hold position and began composing a message to Coalition High Command, explaining the delay in the operation. Around me, my senior staff did their jobs with the focused silence of people who understood that something was happening that none of their training had named. Outside the viewport, the Relentless held its angle, its weapon charge steady, its identification ping going out into the dark. Waiting. Still deciding. Or perhaps it had already decided and was simply giving me the courtesy of a few more minutes to understand what I had arrived at. The thought arrived and I pushed it away. I pushed it away, and it came back, and I pushed it away again. Outside, one ship sat against the stars and breathed its intent into the silence between us. I did not sleep that cycle. I do not think anyone on the collective resolve slept. We held position through the long hours of that first night, and we watched, and the Relentless watched back, and nobody on either side moved, and the whole enormous weight of the Coalition's greatest armada sat in the dark feeling, for reasons not one of us could have clearly articulated, extraordinarily small. The identification ping continued. Steady. Patient. Certain. I had commanded 31 years of fleets, and I had never lost a ship, and I sat in my chair, and I thought about that number, my clean zero, my perfect record, and something at the base of my throat told me that number was about to change. I told it to be quiet. It was not quiet. And then the sun came up on the second day, and the Relentless made its decision, and everything I thought I knew about war walked out an airlock and did not come back. There is a sound that a weapon makes when it fires without warning, not the sound of the weapon itself, which travels through no medium in space, but the sound inside your own ship when the sensors register the discharge. A tone, a sequence of tones actually, calibrated specifically to bypass the cognitive processing layer and go straight to the part of the brain that moves bodies before minds catch up. I heard that sound. My body was out of the chair before I finished hearing it. Contact. Weapons discharge from the Relentless. Forward array. Full charge. Target is. The rest of Oran's sentence landed the same moment the picket ship on our forward left flank stopped existing. Not damaged. Not disabled. Not driven back. Stopped existing. I stood at the center of my bridge and stared at the sensor readout where the Vethis 7, a mid-grade patrol vessel with a crew of 80, had been registered 1 second ago and was now registered as an expanding debris field with a thermal signature consistent with total internal detonation. 80 crew. The Relentless had not targeted its shields, had not targeted its engines, had not sent a warning shot across its bow, which even in the most aggressive coalition engagements was standard practice before attempting destruction of a vessel. It had targeted the reactor housing directly, with a weapon yield our records said the human vessel did not possess, and it had converted 80 lives and 8,000 tons of coalition engineering into a geometry problem. No warning, no declaration, no pre-engagement protocol. The thought arrived, they do not know our protocols. The second thought arrived before the first one finished, they know. They simply do not care. All stations, combat alert, shields to full, tactical, I need targeting solutions on. The Relentless fired again. The second shot was different. It did not target a ship. It targeted the space between two ships, two of my heavy cruisers in the mid-left formation, and when the energy discharge passed through that gap it did something I had never seen a weapon do. It scattered, not randomly. It scattered in a precise cone that caught both vessels across their forward sensor arrays and stripped them clean, blinding them simultaneously. Both cruisers immediately fell out of formation, their navigation systems struggling to compensate. A gap opened in my mid-left flank. The Relentless moved through it. One ship, moving through a gap in the formation of 4,000, moving fast, not in a straight line, in a curve that should have put it directly into the overlapping fire lanes of 6 of my ships, but the curve was precise enough that it threaded every fire lane by margins that could not have been accidental. Open fire, I said. 400 ships in the immediate formation opened fire simultaneously. The Relentless was not where they fired. Not because it had moved after we fired, because it had moved before we fired, before I gave the order, as if it had read my decision a half-second before I made it. The energy discharge from 400 weapon systems cut through empty space, and the Relentless was already on the other side of my formation, coming around in a tight arc that put it directly above the collective resolve. Above my ship. Evasive. All power to upper shields. Commander, it is not targeting the resolve. It is... A third shot. This one took out a communications relay ship, the Serenal, positioned 2 kilometers to our starboard. The Serenal handled roughly 30% of our fleet-wide coordination signals. When it went, I felt it in the response time of my formation, the way you feel a tooth pulled, that sudden wrongness where something functional used to be. The Relentless arced past us and drove back into the formation, and for the next 4 minutes, which felt longer than my entire career, I watched one ship navigate 4,000 like it was walking through a room it had memorized. It did not fire constantly. That was the part that defied every tactical model I knew. It fired selectively. Communications ships, navigation relay vessels, the 3 ships in our formation that carried the fleet-wide coordination AI. It was not trying to destroy us. It was trying to disconnect us. And it was succeeding. Yu-chun, get me a status on fleet coordination. Yu-chun was working 3 consoles simultaneously, his earlier composure entirely gone, replaced by the focused desperation of someone trying to hold a crumbling wall. We have lost direct coordination with approximately 400 vessels in the mid and rear formation, Commander. They are receiving general broadcast commands, but our precision tactical network is compromised. Reroute through the secondary relay array. The Telorn is not responding. He paused. The pause was a fraction of a second too long. The Telorn is gone, Commander. The Telorn. Crew of 112. I pulled up the tactical display. Around the Relentless, my formation was responding the way any large formation responds when its coordination network takes damage. Ships were tightening defensively, pulling toward the nearest neighbor, consolidating into clusters. It was standard defensive doctrine. Tested. Proven. Every commander in that fleet was doing exactly what their training said to do. I watched the Relentless adjust its course in response to our consolidation, and something cold moved through me. Oren, I said. Commander. The clusters. Our ships are clustering. A pause. Then, very quietly, yes, Commander. Is that what it wants? Another pause. Longer. I think, Oren said, and his voice had the texture of a man being careful with a very fragile thing. That may be exactly what it wants. I looked at the display. 4,000 ships pulling together into tighter groupings, overlapping shields, concentrating firepower. Standard defensive doctrine. The thing you did when a threat was moving too fast to track individually. Pull together. Cover each other. Concentrate. The thing you did when you were used to fighting enemies who wanted to destroy you. The Relentless did not want to destroy us. It wanted us in clusters. I opened the fleet-wide channel. All ships, break formation. Disperse. I repeat, disperse. Do not cluster. Spread to maximum individual spacing immediately. The order went out. The formation began to respond, slowly. 4,000 ships reconfiguring takes time, even with perfect coordination. And our coordination was not perfect anymore. Ships that had already pulled close to neighbors now had to navigate away from them, and in those navigation adjustments, in those few seconds of transition, the Relentless was moving again. It targeted a cluster of 11 ships that had not yet received the disperse order or had not yet complied. The weapon it used was not the same weapon it had used on the Vethys 7. This was wider. A pulse rather than a beam. A spreading discharge that caught all 11 ships across their shield emitters simultaneously, not destroying the shields but destabilizing them in a resonance pattern that made them useless for the next 40 seconds. 40 seconds was enough time for the Relentless to put 4 precision shots into 4 of the 11 ships. 4 more ships gone. I stood at my display and did something I had not done in 31 years of service. I lost count. I stopped counting losses because the number was moving too fast, and I needed every part of my mind for something else. New targeting protocol, I said. Stop trying to lead the vessel. Target where it is, not where it is going. Overlap fire with adjacent ships. Minimum 6 ship coordination per shot. Do not fire alone. The tactical officers throughout the fleet heard me and implemented. Within 30 seconds, 6 ship coordinated fire solutions were forming, each group targeting the Relentless's last confirmed position. The Relentless fired twice more in those 30 seconds. A navigation vessel, a medical support ship. Then it simply stopped. I registered the cessation of weapons fire before my mind caught up with what it meant. The Relentless was still moving, still inside our formation, but its weapon arrays had gone dark, not powered down. Dark, in the sense that we could no longer read their charge status. The ship had done something to its weapon signature that our sensors could not interpret. Weapons status on the Relentless? Unknown, my sensor officer said. The word had never sounded quite that heavy before. Is it damaged? No visible damage. Hull integrity appears complete. We have not landed a single direct hit, Commander. Not one hit. 4,000 ships and we had not touched it. The Relentless coasted through my formation at reduced speed, threading between ships that were now trying to maintain maximum spacing from each other, and from it, and from each other in relation to it. My fleet had, in the space of approximately 20 minutes, gone from the most disciplined armada the coalition had ever assembled, to 4,000 ships, trying very hard not to be near anything. I forced myself to think past the immediate. What did it want? Not destruction. If it wanted destruction, ships would be going faster than they were. It was capable of faster. I had watched it. What it had done was remove our communications infrastructure, blind our coordination, and herd us into defensive clusters that it then demonstrated it could handle at will, without destroying us, to prove it could. It was not fighting us. It was teaching us something. My communications officer turned from her console. Her name was Adra, and she had 20 years of service and a reputation for being unshakable. And she was shaking. Commander, the Relentless is transmitting. The bridge went very still. On speakers, I said. The human voice that came through the audio system was not what I expected. I do not know what I expected. Something cold, perhaps. Something in keeping with what the vessel had just done. The voice was a man's voice, unhurried, with an accent I could not place, and a tone that sounded almost inconveniently calm, the way a person sounds when they are discussing something entirely settled. The translation came through our systems in real time, a half-second behind the original audio. Coalition Fleet. This is the commanding officer of the Relentless. We have been monitoring your position in this system for 72 hours. You entered without filing an approach notice with Human Territorial Administration, and you did not respond to our initial contact requests. So I will assume there has been some breakdown in communications procedure on both sides, and I am willing to start fresh. A pause. However, I need you to understand something clearly before we continue. You are inside human-claimed space. That is not a negotiating position. That is a fact. What you do next will determine what we do next. I suggest you take some time to think about it. Take as much time as you need. We will be here. The transmission ended. I stood there for a moment. Then I said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "They contacted us first." Boren turned from his station. "Commander?" "Before we arrived, they tried to contact us. The initial ping we identified as an identification signal. It was not. It was a contact attempt. We classified it as identification and ignored it. The silence on the bridge was complete. I thought about the pre-engagement contact package we had sent, the formal coalition diplomatic register, the grievance statements, and the ritualized invitation to negotiate. All of it sent on coalition formal frequencies, in coalition formal register, through coalition standard protocols, none of which the humans used. They had been transmitting on a different band, an informal band, a band we classified automatically as navigation-level traffic. We had filtered it out. We had looked at their initial transmission, and our systems had sorted it into a category called routine transponder and moved on. They had been talking to us from the moment they saw us. We had not heard them. And then we had sent them the kind of message you send to a species you intend to discipline, full of formal language and ritualized grievance, and the implicit assumption that they would respond on our terms, in our register, through our process. They had looked at that message and done the arithmetic and understood, correctly, that we had not heard them, and were not planning to listen, and they had decided what to do about that. I reached the chair. I sat down carefully. "Get me a direct channel to the Relentless." Not the formal diplomatic register, standard frequency, conversational register. Adra set it up in under a minute. She was good at her job even when she was shaking. I opened the channel. "Relentless. This is Commander Vexthera Osun, of the Coalition Fleet. I am transmitting on your frequency and your protocol. I received your message. I would like to begin communications from the beginning, if you are willing." The response came back in 40 seconds. "Commander Osun. Yes, we are willing. My name is Captain Owen Lark. I think we need to have a conversation about how you got the idea this was a good plan." He did not sound angry. He sounded, if anything, like a man who had just solved a puzzle he had been working on for a while. I thought about the Vethys 7, about the Serenal, about the Telorn, about the number I had stopped counting. I thought about my 31 years of zero losses, and the morning where I had checked that number and felt proud of it. "Captain Lark," I said, "I am beginning to think the same thing." Outside, the Relentless held position inside my formation, surrounded by 4,000 ships that had not managed to touch it, and waited with the patience of something that had already decided how this ended, and was simply allowing me the time to arrive at the same conclusion. Union spoke from his station. His voice was quiet. It had lost the professional flatness entirely. "Commander, how many ships do they have? In total, the humans?" I did not answer immediately. He asked because he needed to know, because we all needed to know, because one ship had done this, and we needed to understand what the number behind one ship looked like. I had read the intelligence assessments. I knew the projected figures for human military production capacity, based on our long-range surveys of their home system and their known colonies. I had read those figures and considered them theoretical. I looked at my tactical display, at one ugly, asymmetrical ship sitting calm and immovable in the center of the greatest armada the Coalition had built in 8 centuries. "Yun," I said. "Commander, I need you to go get those figures from the intelligence archive, the full assessment, not the summary." He left his station to retrieve them. I sat in my chair and looked at the Relentless. One ship. And all I could think was that, wherever humanity kept its real warships, they were not here. This was not their warship. This was the thing they sent first, before the warships. The thing that arrived and waited and assessed and then, when not listened to, demonstrated the minimum necessary point. The minimum necessary point had destroyed 6 of my ships and crippled the coordination of 4,000 others. Minimum necessary. Those 2 words sat in the center of my chest like a stone dropped in water. I thought about what maximum necessary might look like. I thought about it for a long time. Around me, The fleet held position and tried to recalibrate systems and count casualties and make sense of a 20-minute engagement that had rewritten everything we thought we knew about what an engagement could be. And I sat in my chair in the middle of all of that, and I thought about a human phrase I had read once in an old translation file, dismissed at the time as primitive posturing. The phrase was this: "You should see the other guy." I had read it and thought it was about injury, about physical damage, the way all primitive war language was about physical damage. You should see the damage I did to the enemy, a boast. I understood now that it was not about damage. It was about the look on the other person's face. You should see what they understood. You should see what they realized. I looked at the relentless. I thought about Owen Lark, sitting somewhere inside that ugly ship, patient and unhurried, waiting for me to start the conversation that should have started 72 hours ago before any of this happened. My clean zero was gone. The number I checked every morning would never be zero again. But I was still here. My remaining fleet was still here. The Relentless had stopped firing and opened a channel and called its captain by his name instead of his rank. I did not fully understand what that meant yet. I was starting to. The intelligence files arrived on my display. I looked at the projected figures for human military capacity. I read them twice. Then I sat very still for a moment, the way you sit when a floor you thought was solid turns out to be glass. I composed myself. I opened the channel to Owen Lark. We began to talk. Deep in the intelligence archive, underneath the figures I had just read, was a subfolder I had not opened. It was labeled Early Contact Reports, marked Low Priority, when it was filed 12 years ago. Inside it were the records of humanity's first responses when coalition survey vessels had first detected their civilization and filed standard new species assessment reports classifying them as Tier 9, pre-interstellar, no significant military concern. The humans had known about those reports. They had been watching us classify them for 12 years. And they had been, in their patient and unhurried way, preparing the appropriate response. The Relentless was the appropriate response. It was also, I would learn later, the oldest ship in the human fleet, pulled out of a museum preservation program and recommissioned specifically for this meeting. They had not sent a warship. They had sent a museum piece. The thing they sent when they were not trying. I thought about the numbers in the intelligence file. I did not sleep that night either. Or the night after. Some realizations work that way. They are too large to process standing up and too sharp to hold while lying down, and so you carry them through the dark hours, moving from corridor to viewport to chair and back, and you think, and you count, and you try to fit what you now know into the shape of what you thought you knew, and the shape keeps being wrong. Outside, through the viewport of the collective resolve, the Relentless sat calm and patient among 4,000 ships, like a word, in a language you have been mispronouncing for 30 years. The word was not a threat. The word was a question. And the question was this: now that you understand who we are, what would you like to do next? I already knew my answer. I just needed the rest of the coalition to believe me when I told them what I had seen. That part, as it turned out, would be harder than the battle. It always is. 3 months earlier, when the mission was being planned in the marble corridors of the coalition assembly, a senior minister had stood before the Strategic Council and said something I had written down because it had the clean confidence of a statement that expected to be quoted in history. He had said, "Humanity will be reminded of its place." He had said it to applause. He had said it in a room full of people who had never once considered that humanity might disagree about where its place was. I thought about that applause. I thought about the Vethis 7. I composed the first paragraph of my report to Coalition High Command. I deleted it. I started again. I was going to have to find language for something that had no precedent in 11,000 years of coalition military history. I was going to have to explain, to people who had not been here, what it felt like to watch one ship do what the Relentless had done. Not just what it had done technically, not just the weapon yields and the maneuver patterns and the targeting precision, but the other thing, the feeling, the thing that had no entry in any tactical manual I had ever read. The feeling of being studied. The Relentless had not been trying to win a battle. It had been reading us. Every response we made, every formation shift, every tactical decision, it had been taking notes. Our doctrine had flowed through that engagement like data through a sensor array, and something on that ship had been recording all of it. I thought about what they would do with those notes. I thought about 3 more human signatures, which was a figure I did not know yet, which was a figure that would arrive in my intelligence reports 4 days later, and which would be worse than I imagined, even having spent all those sleepless hours imagining terrible things. But that was later. That night, I sat with the first draft of my report, and the viewport full of stars, and one museum piece of a warship sitting patient among my fleet, and I wrote the truest sentence I had ever written in 31 years of official documents. It said, "We made a mistake, and I am not sure we understand yet how large it is." I sent it. Then I went back to the channel. Owen Lark was still there, unhurried, waiting. We talked through the night. By morning, I knew enough to know I needed to know more. By morning, I also knew that the conversation we were having, he and I, 2 people in 2 ships separated by 400 kilometers of vacuum and 11,000 years of divergent history, was probably the most important conversation anyone in the coalition had conducted in a very long time. He knew it too. I could hear it in the way he was careful with his words without being dishonest. He was precise. He was direct. He did not use our formal register, and he did not apologize for not using it. He spoke the way someone speaks when they respect you enough to say the true thing instead of the comfortable thing. "You came here with 4,000 ships," he said at one point, "to correct our behavior. That is the operational framing. Yes. How's that working out?" I looked at my casualty figures. "I am revising the framing," I said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. In the audio translation it came through as something closer to a short exhale, but I thought it was a laugh. "Commander Osun," he said, "I think you and I are going to understand each other just fine." Outside, the Relentless held its position, patient and solid and ugly, and the identification ping that had started all of this finally, quietly, stopped. It had served its purpose. We were talking now. A lot of things, I was beginning to understand, were about to change. I sent a second message to Coalition High Command. It was longer than the first. It contained the engagement data, the casualty report, the weapon signature analyses, and the intelligence file figures with my annotations. At the bottom, I added one line. It said, "Do not send more ships." Then I went back to talking to Owen Lark, because talking to Owen Lark was the only thing in the entire situation that felt, in any sense whatsoever, like the right direction. The stars outside held still. The Relentless held still. I held still. And the galaxy, though it did not know it yet, had just become a fundamentally different place than it had been yesterday morning. In the archive, beneath the intelligence files, beneath the early contact reports, there was one more document. It was a transcript of the first automated message humanity had ever transmitted when they detected coalition survey probes entering their outer system a decade ago. It was 3 sentences. It said, "Hello. We have been watching you watch us. We thought it was time to say something." 3 sentences, filed under routine transponder traffic, automatically sorted into low priority, never read by anyone with enough clearance to understand what they were looking at. We had ignored their hello. We had classified them as Tier 9 and moved on. And they had waited, patiently, for the moment when they could make sure we listened. I read those 3 sentences in the pale light of my viewport at 2 in the morning, while 4,000 ships sat in silence around one museum-piece warship, and I understood, finally and completely, what kind of mistake we had made. Not the tactical mistake, not the intelligence failure, not the diplomatic breakdown. The older mistake, the foundational one. We had looked at something we did not understand, and we had given it a number and filed it away. We had looked at humanity and seen a Tier 9 species with no significant military concern. We had not asked what they were building. We had not asked what they were waiting for. We had not considered that a species could be watching you classify them and deciding, quietly and without hurry, exactly what they were going to do when you finally showed up in person with 4,000 ships and a pre-engagement contact package full of the language of people who expected to be obeyed. We had not considered that their answer to that package might be one ship that outperformed everything we sent, one ship they pulled from a museum. Somewhere in human space, in facilities our surveys had never located, in numbers our intelligence had systematically underestimated, the real fleet waited. Owen Lark had not told me this directly. He had not needed to. He was a careful man, precise and direct and honest, and he had not once, in an entire night of conversation, mentioned how many ships humanity had ready. Careful people leave out the things they do not need to say. I did not ask. I did not ask because I already knew that if I heard the number in plain language I would have to include it in my report, and I would have to watch what it did to the Coalition Council, and I was not ready for that yet. I wanted one more night of knowing what I knew, without everyone else knowing it. One more night of this particular silence, which had weight and texture, and was the closest thing to peace I expected to feel for a very long time. Dawn cycle began on the collective resolve. The ship's systems shifted lighting gradients, signaling the crew to begin rotation. The relentless did not change at all. It never did. It was already exactly what it intended to be, and it did not need the day to tell it so. I poured myself something warm from the service unit behind my chair, and I looked at it, and I looked at the ship outside, and I thought about 11,000 years. 11,000 years of a galaxy that had known its own shape. The shape was different now. We had come here to remind humanity of its place. In the end, it was the other way around. In the end, it always had been.